Hello, I'm Craig, and welcome to my first ever YouTube broadcast. My hope is to pass on information and insight and perhaps a message or two that some of you may find pertinent and maybe even helpful. I consider myself an intuitive empath and claircognizant, among other things. I also do a little energy healing. May you live in interesting times. Of course, I'm quoting a Chinese proverb, but we are definitely in the middle of interesting times. Whether that is good or bad largely depends on your point of view, but the saying cuts both ways. I recently felt called to write something about the shift in consciousness that is happening at this time. It seems fitting that I should use that for my first video. I want to share some thoughts with you. These are based on a number of different things: personal experience, scientific observation, quantum physics, philosophy. As I pass along this information, you may be tempted at one point or another to pull on an individual thread of this and get lost in your own perspective or experience of it. I urge you to set that aside for the duration of this writing, and I will endeavor to pull it all together into coherence by the end. This is a very unique time in history. Things are changing at a very frenetic pace. This can be very unsettling for many of us. When the status quo is toppled on its side, we tend to reach for fear before anything else. That's understandable given the nature of this world and the experience most of us have had. However, I want to interject a radical idea here: change your focus. In quantum physics, we have learned that about the observer effect. Basically, this shows us that by observing something, we alter it. In the experiment, it was proven that quantum particles, which make up everything, are in a state of superposition, or basically all positions at the same time, until someone looks at them and then they collapse into a single position. Among other things, this demonstrates how important the observer, us, is in any situation. Without us, there is really only possibility or potential. But when we look at something, focus on it, then it becomes a specific thing. Now, most of us know that perspective is everything. One man's trash is another man's treasure is an example of this. If there was a car accident and 10 people observed it from 10 different locations, you would get 10 similar but varying descriptions of what actually happened. It's important to remember that not only were these 10 people in different physical locations, but they also have their unique perspective on life based upon their own experiences and interpretations of those experiences. Now they all observe the same event, but their perspectives can and usually do vary widely. Another spin-off of quantum physics is that what we focus on increases. Most of us have experienced this, but if you are not convinced, you can try this experiment. Focus your attention on a thought for 17 seconds, and when you cross that threshold, your mind will begin to create more thoughts that resonate with the original one. Focus on it for 68 seconds, or 4 times 17, and your mind will begin to really gain momentum in whatever direction you are going. The body will also get involved, and you will have feelings associated with your thoughts. If you continue, the feelings will become stronger and they will begin to influence your thoughts to create more of the same feelings so that you can have more of the same chemical reaction in your body. If you don't believe this, I urge you to try. It's been shown that people think somewhere between 60 and 70,000 thoughts every day, but the majority of these thoughts are the same as the thoughts they had the day before. Imagine the momentum after years of doing this. Now add this to the observer effect and you have a recipe for what we experience in our lives. In simple terms, focus on the negative and you can expect more negative. Focus on the positive and you can expect more positive. Or as a little old man I once knew used to say, focus on the problem and the problem increases. Focus on the solution and the problem goes away. I encourage you to really consider this, as I believe this is where our true power lies. Let me give you an example: discrimination. Prejudice has existed in the world probably since someone noticed that someone else was different. At some point in our history, that was a threat, and this has been ingrained in us. Now, it doesn't matter what kind of difference you want to focus on. Racial, gender, sexual orientation, cultural, it's basically the same across the board. But I'm going to talk about racial, specifically black and white, but you can insert any 2 colors and the story stays the same. When I was a kid going to school in the 60s and 70s, racial discrimination was very prevalent. and it was decided that kids in poor black communities were not getting the same opportunities as kids in white communities, which for the most part was true. Someone had the idea that the way to overcome this was to send the poor black kids to school in the more affluent white neighborhoods and to send more affluent white kids to school in the poor black neighborhoods. It was thought that this would encourage integration between the different cultures. It was called busing. And while in theory it might sound like a good idea, in practice it simply did not work. I suspect that the poor kids struggled with seeing what they could not afford to have every day and living their school life in a culture that was vastly different from their home life. And the more affluent kids struggled with seeing what they did not want every day. Is a grossly simplified version of what was experienced, but let's just say it didn't work. Later in the 90s, someone had the idea that since black people were being excluded from getting jobs based solely on the fact that they were black, regardless of whether they were qualified or not, the best thing to do would be to create affirmative action. This more or less incentivized hiring minority people. Seems like a good idea on the surface, but here was my experience. I worked at a quasi-city agency at the time. They had a board of directors and an outspoken black city councilman was on that board. I worked as an electrician for this agency and we needed to hire another electrician. My boss at the time told me he was being pressured to hire this person who was a black ex-con. The pressure was coming from the councilman. The man they wanted him to hire had learned in prison about electrical work and had achieved a master's license. Now, in theory, a master electrician would be considered more beneficial than, say, a residential wireman. But in reality, I've known commercial electricians that didn't know much about residential wiring. It's often a very specialized trade. In this particular case, a residential wireman was all that was needed. Nevertheless, the man was hired. Now, this agency had two different divisions. One was maintenance, which were all permanent positions, and one was construction, which were all temporary positions. As work waxed and waned, there would be layoffs in the construction division and then hirebacks. It was policy that the person with the most seniority would always be hired back first. Then one day my boss told me that he was being pressured to hire the black man back before others that had seniority over him. This went on and on until one day they decided to make a bunch of the construction workers permanent, and this man was made permanent even though there were others with more seniority. At one point, the agency's insurance company decided to make it a policy that anyone that had an alcohol-related traffic violation would not be insured to drive agency vehicles. 17 workers were laid off in one day, but this particular individual who happened to have an alcohol-related traffic violation presented a dilemma. Since he fell under the affirmative action clause, they were reluctant to let him go, and instead they assigned another electrician to drive him around. So everywhere he needed to go, they basically paid a guy to drive him at the salary of an electrician. What this behavior had the result of doing was to convince this man that he could do most anything and not lose his job. So you can understand that all motivation to be a diligent worker was pretty much removed at that point, and he took advantage accordingly. These are two examples of how focusing on the problem only created more problems. Now I'm going to talk about the 100th monkey effect. This is based on a scientific study of monkeys on an island. If you Google this, AI will tell you that it is an exaggeration of a real scientific observation. However, it has been proven that groups that come together and meditate on or focus on peace, for example, have a real-world measurable effect on the behaviors of other people. It is recognized that there is a critical mass of people that once crossed has this influence. It's actually a very small percentage, the square root of 1%. Anyway, this story is about critical mass. So in the story, it was observed that a female monkey on an isolated island one day began washing her food. Other monkeys began to imitate this behavior. Eventually, a critical mass was achieved. In this case, it was the 100th monkey. And then monkeys everywhere began washing their food. This also corroborates the concept in quantum physics that everything, everywhere is connected. The idea is that through this quantum connection, monkeys everywhere learned how to wash their food even though they weren't physically present when this skill was learned. So let's bring this all together. In today's world, we are being bombarded with so much negativity that it's hard to see anything positive. I believe this is by design. If the powers that be can keep us enmeshed in negative thinking and this drives negative behavior, then they can continue to reap the benefits. It's a pick your poison situation. Politics, economy, war, human trafficking, there's no shortage of things to be outraged and or fearful about. However, these are the problems, my friends. These are not the solutions. And the more we focus on them, the more they increase. In fact, it is my assertion here that we are in this very state because negativity has been increasing for so long that it has reached a tipping point. We can continue to contribute to the negativity and in doing experience untold misery, or we can use our true power, focus on the solutions, and one day we will reach critical mass where people everywhere will begin to do things differently. It's not going to take as many people as you might expect. In fact, I believe that very many people are doing this already. You may know them as light workers. The thing to keep in mind is that all the major communication networks, whether it's the news media or social media, are designed to keep us focused on what's wrong, so you don't hear nearly as much about all that is right. I believe the way to make a real difference is to let go of fear. How do we do that? Fear lives in the future. Start living in the present. The present moment is where our true power lies. Everything happens in the present. We can do nothing about the future or the past, but we can do something different in the present. We can change our focus. This is no simple thing I am suggesting. Most of us have shaped our identities based upon what we think about and believe, and I'm sure that many of you will think that I am asking you to stop caring about politics, war, etc. I'm not. I'm asking you to stop focusing your attention on these things. Stop talking about them, stop feeding the energy into them, and by doing so, allowing them to grow. They need your energy to sustain themselves. Remove enough of it and they will wither and die. When critical mass is reached, and I believe we are close, an entirely different experience will be available to anyone that wishes to participate. But participate we must. It is not enough to just say, I want that kind of life. We have to create it. And this is how we do that. Stop watching the news. Stop talking about what's wrong. Stop focusing your thoughts on the problems and focus on the solution. Be kind to each other. Find the love in your heart. Reach out to the people you are close to and foster these qualities. Notice the good things. They are all around you, and the more you focus on them, the more you will see and create. You don't have to go change everyone on the other side of the world, or the nation, or even your community. That is not where our power lies. Change yourself and your focus, and the people closest to you will see that it is worth doing. They will see that they too can be happy and focus on the beauty of this world. And when critical mass is reached, the ugly will simply cease being. Well, thank you for joining me today. If you have any comments or if you like this content, please drop a message, and I'll see you next time.